You know, they say, you never forget the moment your world falls apart. They're right. I can still feel the cold bite of that October air on my face. The way the coffee shop door chimed as she stepped out with him, the exact shade of her lipstick. That deep burgundy she only wore on special occasions. I thought she was wearing it for me that morning when she kissed me goodbye. Turns out, she was wearing it for someone else entirely. My name is David, and this is the story of how I discovered my wife of 8 years. Sarah was having an affair. But more than that, this is the story of how I found myself again after losing everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the woman I'd built my entire adult life around. It started on a Tuesday. Isn't it funny how the worst moments of your life can happen on the most ordinary days? I was 37, working as a senior project manager at a tech consulting firm downtown. Sarah was 35, a marketing director at a mid-sized advertising agency. We were what everyone called the perfect couple. No kids by choice initially, then by circumstance when fertility became an issue. But we'd made peace with that. We had our careers, our beautiful townhouse in the suburbs, our weekend trips. To wine country, our Friday night ritual of ordering Thai food and binge-watching whatever series we were obsessed with that month. That Tuesday, I decided to break my routine. I usually grabbed lunch at the same deli near my office, but I was feeling restless, maybe even a little bored with the predictability of my days. So I walked further than usual, exploring a neighborhood I'd driven through countless times but never really seen. There's something liberating about walking streets you've never walked. Seeing your city from a pedestrian's perspective, instead of through a windshield, I was enjoying the crisp autumn air. The way the leaves crunched under my feet when I saw them. Across the street, emerging from a cozy little coffee shop I'd never noticed before, was my wife. But she wasn't alone. She was with Marcus. I recognized him immediately from her office Christmas parties. Tall, athletic, with that perfectly styled hair that probably took him longer to fix than it took Sarah to do her makeup. I'd met him maybe 3 times over the years. Always found him a little too charming, a little too interested in making Sarah laugh. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Colleagues grabbing coffee. Nothing unusual about that. I almost called out to her, almost waved and jogged across the street to say hello and maybe join them. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she was looking at him, or the way he was leaning in close to hear whatever she was saying. There was an intimacy there that made my stomach clench with a feeling I couldn't quite name yet. Then it happened. Marcus slipped his arm around Sarah's waist, not the casual, friendly gesture you might see between colleagues, but the possessive, comfortable touch of someone who had done it many times before. She didn't pull away. She didn't look surprised. Instead, she melted into him like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then he kissed her. Not a peck on the cheek, not an accidental brush of lips, but a real kiss. Passionate, urgent. The kind of kiss that says, I've been thinking about this all morning. The world didn't stop. I know people always say that in moments like these, but for me, it was the opposite. Everything kept moving. Cars driving by, people walking past me, leaves falling from the trees, while I stood there frozen, watching my marriage crumble in real time. It was like being underwater, where you can see everything happening above the surface. But you can't reach it, can't affect it, can't even breathe. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been seconds, could have been minutes. When I finally came back to myself, they were walking away, hand in hand. Disappearing around a corner like they were just another couple in love, enjoying a beautiful afternoon. Which, I realized with a sickening jolt, they were. The walk back to my office was a blur. I remember passing people on the sidewalk and wondering if they could see it on my face, the betrayal, the confusion, the way my entire sense of reality had just been rearranged without my consent. I felt like I was wearing a sign that said, "This man just discovered his wife is cheating," but of course, no one noticed. To them, I was just another guy in a suit walking back from lunch. I couldn't concentrate for the rest of the day. I sat in meetings where important decisions were being made, nodded at appropriate moments, even contributed to conversations. But I wasn't really there. My mind kept replaying that kiss, analyzing every detail. The way she'd risen up on her toes to meet his lips. The way her hand had rested on his chest. The smile on her face afterward, a smile I hadn't seen in months. How long had this been going on? The question consumed me. I started thinking back over the past few months, looking for signs I'd missed. the late nights at the office that had become more frequent, the way she'd started taking her phone everywhere, even to the bathroom, the new lingerie I'd found in her drawer, pieces I'd never seen her wear for me, the way she'd seemed distracted during our conversations, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. God, how had I been so blind? By 5 o'clock, I knew I couldn't go home and pretend everything was normal. The thought of sitting across from her at dinner, making small talk about our days while knowing what I knew, felt impossible. So I texted her something about my friend Jake going through a rough divorce and needing support. She responded immediately with heart emojis and told me what a good friend I was. The irony made me want to throw my phone across the room. Instead of going to Jake's, I drove to a parking lot behind a shopping center and just sat in my car. I called in sick for the next day, something I hadn't done in years. Then I just sat there as the sun set, watching families load groceries into their cars, teenagers hanging out by the Starbucks, old couples walking slowly toward the pharmacy. Normal life continuing all around me while mine fell apart. That's when the memories started flooding in. Our first date, she'd worn a blue dress that brought out her eyes, and we'd talked until the restaurant started putting chairs up on tables. Around us, our wedding day, how beautiful she looked walking down the aisle, how her hand shook when we exchanged vows. The night we decided to start trying for kids, lying in bed afterward, talking about names and whether we wanted boys or girls. The devastating conversations with doctors when we learned it wasn't going to happen naturally. The way we'd held each other and promised that we were enough, just the two of us. I remembered our 5th anniversary trip to Italy, how we'd gotten lost in Venice and ended up finding this tiny restaurant where the owner's mother cooked for just 6 tables. Sarah had tried to speak Italian with the waiter, butchering the pronunciation so badly that we all ended up laughing until our sides hurt. That night, back in our hotel room overlooking the canal, she'd told me she'd never been happier in her life had she been lying then. Or had something changed between that night in Venice and this afternoon outside the coffee shop? I spent the night in my car, dozing fitfully, and waking every hour or so with the momentary confusion of not knowing where I was, followed by the crushing remembrance of why I was sleeping in a parking lot instead of in my own bed. By morning, I looked like hell, stubble, wrinkled clothes, probably smelling like the fast food I'd grabbed for dinner. I went to a gym I'd belonged to, but barely used, showered and changed into the spare clothes I kept in my locker. Then called my office to extend my sick day. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I confronted her. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started investigating my own wife. It started small. I drove by her office building, wondering if I'd see them together. I checked her social media accounts, looking for clues in her posts and photos. I even created a fake Instagram account to follow. Marcus, scrolling through his pictures looking for any sign of Sarah. I felt pathetic doing it. Like some creepy stalker, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to know the truth. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Going back through Marcus's posts over the past 6 months, I could see the progression of their relationship playing out in coded messages and carefully cropped photos. A picture of 2 coffee cups on a table with the caption, "Great brainstorming session." A photo of a restaurant I recognized as Sarah's favorite, posted on a night she'd told me she was working late. A sunset shot from the overlook where Sarah and I had gone on our 3rd date, posted just 2 weeks ago on a Saturday when she'd said she was having drinks with her college roommate. Lisa. The evidence was everywhere once I knew what to look for. Text messages that arrived at odd hours that made her smile in ways I couldn't interpret. New clothes that appeared in her closet, not just the lingerie, but dresses I'd never seen. A leather jacket that wasn't her usual style, a gym membership she'd started 3 months ago, claiming she wanted to get in shape, but I'd never seen her work out at home. The most damning evidence came when I accessed our cell phone account online. I'd never thought to check it before, why would I? But there it was, a detailed record of every call and text message. For the past 4 months, Sarah had been in constant contact with Marcus's. Multiple texts every day, phone calls that lasted hours, including several late-night conversations that happened while I was sleeping right next to her. I printed out the phone records and spread them across the kitchen table of our home while Sarah was at work. Seeing it all laid out like that, the frequency and timing of their communication made it impossible to deny what was happening. This wasn't a recent development or a moment of weakness. This was a full-blown affair that had been building for months. The hardest part was realizing that during all of this, Sarah had been coming home to me every night. She'd been kissing me goodbye every morning, asking about my day over dinner, making love to me on weekends, all while living this double life with another man. The betrayal wasn't just that she'd fallen for someone else, it was that she'd become an expert at lying to my face. I spent 3 days gathering evidence before I finally decided to confront her. 3 days of pretending to be sick, of driving around aimlessly, of sitting in coffee shops and parks trying to figure out how to handle this. I considered hiring a private investigator, considered confronting Marcus first, even considered just packing up and leaving without a word. But I knew I needed to hear it from her. I needed to look her in the eyes and give her a chance to tell me the truth, even though I already knew what that truth was. The confrontation happened on a Friday evening. Sarah came home from work in a good mood, chattering about her day as she kicked off her heels and poured herself a glass of wine. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful, in a way that made this whole situation even more surreal. How could someone who looked at me with such apparent affection be living such an elaborate lie? "How are you feeling?" she asked, settling onto the couch next to me. "You've been under the weather all week." I looked at her, really looked at her, searching for any sign of guilt or nervousness in her expression. There was nothing. She was either the world's best actress, or she'd become so comfortable with her deception that it felt natural. "I'm feeling better," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Actually, I need to talk to you about something." Something in my tone must have alerted her, because her smile faltered slightly. "What's wrong?" I could have eased into it. Could have asked leading questions and given her opportunities to confess on her own. Instead, I decided to be direct. "I saw you with Marcus on Tuesday," I said. "Outside the coffee shop on Elm Street." The color drained from her face so quickly, I thought she might faint. She set her wine glass down with shaking hands and stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. "David, I saw him kiss you," I continued, my voice steady despite the fact that my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "I saw you kiss him back." The silence that followed felt endless. Sarah opened her mouth several times, like she was going to say something, then closed it again. I could see her mind racing, probably trying to figure out how much I knew, whether there was any way to explain this away. Finally, she said, "It's not what you think." I almost laughed at the cliché of it. "What do I think, Sarah? It's not. We're not, ... double quotes." She took a shaky breath. "It just happened. It's not serious, just happened." I pulled out the printed phone records from the coffee table drawer where I had hidden them and spread them in front of her. Hundreds of texts and phone calls over 4 months just happened. She stared at the papers like they were written in hieroglyphics. When she looked back up at me, there were tears in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No urge to comfort her, no instinct to make this easier. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. "How long?" I asked. "David, please, how?" "Long, Sarah. For months," she whispered. It started at the company retreat in June. While I'd been planning our anniversary dinner, she'd been starting an affair. While I'd been researching fertility specialists for one last attempt at having children, she'd been falling in love with someone else. "Do you love him?" The question came out before I could stop it, and I immediately regretted asking. There are some answers you're not prepared to hear, no matter how much you think you want to know the truth. She was quiet for so long, I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, barely audible, "Yes." That single word hit me harder than seeing them kiss had. It confirmed what I'd been afraid of but hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't just physical. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. Sarah had fallen in love with another man while married to me. "What about us?" I asked. "What about our marriage?" "I don't know," she said, and at least she was being honest now. "I'm so confused, David. I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen. For 4 months, it's been happening." She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Are you sorry you did it? Or sorry you got caught?" She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I'm sorry I hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why didn't you tell me?" Why didn't you end our marriage before starting something with him? Because I love you too, she said desperately. I do love you, David. I'm in love. With him, there it was, the distinction that made all the difference. She loved me, past tense, comfortable, familiar love. But she was in love with him, present tense, exciting, all-consuming love. I was her husband, her security, her past. He was her passion, her future, her choice. I stood up from the couch, suddenly needing distance between us. So what happens? Now? I don't know, she said again. I need time to think. Time to think. The laugh that came out of me was bitter. You've had for months to think, Sarah. For months of lying to me every single day while you figured out what you wanted. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. I turned to face her, and I could see my own pain reflected in her eyes. You made your choice. You chose him. The only question now is whether you're going to be honest about it or keep living this lie. She was sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks, looking nothing like the composed, beautiful woman who'd walked through our door an hour ago. I don't want to lose you. You already have, I said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. The moment you kissed him, you lost me. The moment you decided to build a relationship with him while staying married, to me, you lost me. I went upstairs and started packing a bag. Sarah followed me, pleading, trying to explain, but I couldn't hear her anymore. The woman talking to me was a stranger who happened to look like my wife. The Sarah I'd married, the Sarah I'd loved for 10 years, wouldn't have done this. This person, this liar, this cheater, I didn't know her at all. I stayed in a hotel that weekend while Sarah moved out of our house and in with her sister. We communicated through text messages about logistics, who would take what furniture, how to handle the mortgage, whether we needed lawyers. It was surreal, dismantling a 10-year relationship through short, business-like messages. On Monday, I went back to work and told my boss I needed some time off. I'd accumulated plenty of vacation days over the years, rarely taking more than a long weekend here and there. He agreed immediately, probably seeing something in my face that told him this wasn't optional. I spent the next 2 weeks in a kind of suspended animation. I'd wake up in the hotel room and for a split second forget where I was and why. Then reality would crash down, and I'd spend the day trying to figure out how to rebuild a life I'd never imagined living. The hardest part wasn't the practical stuff. Finding a new apartment, separating our finances, dividing up 8 years worth of shared possessions. The hardest part was the loneliness. For 10 years, Sarah had been my first phone call with good news, my comfort during bad days, my companion for everything from grocery shopping to vacation planning. Suddenly, I was alone in a way I hadn't been since my early 20s. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd never considered before, but that my doctor recommended when I went in for stress-related insomnia. Dr. Patricia Williams was a woman in her 50s who specialized in marriage and family issues. She didn't offer platitudes or easy answers, which I appreciated. Instead, she helped me understand that what I was experiencing wasn't just heartbreak, it was grief. You're mourning the death of your marriage, she explained during one of our sessions, but you're also mourning the death of your identity as a husband, your future as you'd imagined it, even your past as you understood it. Everything you thought you knew about your relationship has been called into question. She was right. I found myself re-examining every memory, every conversation, every moment of happiness Sarah and I had shared. Had any of it been real? Had she ever truly loved me? Or had I just been a placeholder until someone better came along? The uncertainty was almost worse than the betrayal itself. 3 weeks after our confrontation, Sarah called me. Not texted, actually called. I stared at her name on my phone screen for several rings before deciding to answer. "Hi," she said, her voice small and uncertain. "Hi, how are you?" The question was so absurd, I almost hung up. How was I? I was devastated. I was angry. I was sleeping for hours a night and had lost 15 pounds because food tasted like cardboard. But I also knew she wasn't really asking for a detailed account of my emotional state. "I'm surviving," I said. "I've been thinking about what you said, about making a choice." I waited. "I'm going to file for divorce," she said. And even though I'd been expecting it, the words still hit like a physical blow. "I think it's the right thing to do, for both of us." "Okay, David, I want you to know, What we had was real. All of it. I did love you. I do love you. But I can't pretend anymore that it's enough. After she hung up, I sat in my hotel room, staring out the window at a parking lot full of cars belonging to other people living temporary lives. I felt empty, not sad, not angry, just hollow. The official end of my marriage should have felt more significant somehow, but it was just another phone call, another item to check off the list of things that needed to be handled. The divorce proceedings were relatively straightforward since we didn't have children and had kept our finances mostly separate. Sarah got the house. She could afford the mortgage on her own, and I didn't want to live there anymore anyway. I got my 401k, my car, and half of our savings account. We split the furniture and household items through a spreadsheet shared via email, checking off lamps and kitchen appliances like items on a grocery list. I found a one-bedroom apartment across town, somewhere I'd never been with Sarah, and slowly began building a new life. I bought new furniture, nothing that matched our old aesthetic, everything chosen purely for my own taste. I discovered I liked mid-century modern design and bold colors, things Sarah had always vetoed as too loud for our carefully coordinated home. 6 months after that, Friday night confrontation, the divorce was finalized. I expected to feel something profound when I signed the papers, but it was just another administrative task. The real end of my marriage had happened the moment I saw Sarah kiss Marcus outside that coffee shop. Everything since then had just been paperwork. But here's the thing about rock bottom, it gives you a solid foundation to build from. Once you've lost everything you thought you couldn't live without and discovered you're still breathing, you realize how strong you actually are. I threw myself into work with renewed focus, taking on projects I'd never had time for when I was rushing home to spend evenings with Sarah. I got promoted 6 months after my divorce was finalized. Partly because I was willing to travel and work longer hours than my colleagues with families, I started dating again, cautiously at first. The women I met through dating apps and friends were kind, intelligent, attractive. But I approached every relationship with a wariness that hadn't existed before Sarah. Trust, I learned, was like virginity once lost. It could never be fully restored. A year after my divorce, I ran into Sarah at a grocery store. She was with Marcus, laughing at something he'd said as they picked out produce together. She looked happy in a way I remembered from our early years together, and seeing them felt like looking at photographs from someone else's life. She saw me before I could escape down another aisle. "David," she said, her smile faltering slightly. "Sarah." Marcus. I nodded to both of them, proud of how normal my voice sounded. "How are you?" she asked, and this time the question seemed genuine. "I'm good," I said, and realized it was true. Really good. We made small talk for a few minutes. Work, mutual friends, the weather. Marcus was polite, but clearly uncomfortable, probably wondering if I was going to cause a scene. Sarah kept glancing at me like she was trying to read something in my expression. As we were saying goodbye, she touched my arm gently. "I'm glad you're doing well," she said. "I worried about you." "You don't need to worry about me anymore," I told her. "That's not your job." Walking away from them, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because seeing Sarah again had brought closure. I'd already found that in therapy and time and the process of rebuilding my life, but because I realized that running into them hadn't destroyed me. I could see Sarah with the man she'd chosen over me and feel nothing but a distant kind of sadness for what we'd lost and a genuine hope that she'd found what she was looking for. That night, I called Dr. Williams for the first time in months. "Saw Sarah today." I told her, "How was that?" "Strange," I said, "but not devastating. I think I might actually be okay." "What does okay look like to you now?" It was a good question. Okay looked like waking up in the morning without that crushing weight on my chest. Okay looked like being able to hear our old songs on the radio without changing the station. Okay looked like believing that love might be possible again someday, even if it would be different than what I'd had before. 2 years after my divorce, I met Emma at a bookstore. She was reaching for the same book I was, a biography of Johnny Cash, and we started talking about music, then books, then everything else. She was recently divorced too, understood the wariness and the walls, but was willing to be patient while we both figured out what love looked like the second time. Around. Emma was nothing like Sarah Burnett, where Sarah was blonde. Quiet, where Sarah was outgoing. practical where Sarah was impulsive. She liked hiking and cooking at home and had no interest in the social climbing that had been so important to Sarah. She read voraciously, listened to podcasts about history and science, and had the most beautiful laugh I'd ever heard. 6 months after we met, Emma moved in with me. A year later, I proposed not with the elaborate surprise Sarah had wanted, but with a simple question asked during a quiet moment on her couch, both of us in pajamas, and reading on a Sunday morning. "Will you marry me?" I asked, looking up from my book. She looked up from hers, considered for a moment, then said, "Yes, I think I will." We married in a small ceremony with just our families and closest friends. No elaborate reception, no expensive dress, no stress about creating the perfect day. Just two people who'd found each other after thinking they might be too broken to find love again. Promising to be honest with each other, even when it was hard, Sarah sent a card I recognized. Her handwriting on the envelope, inside she'd written simply, "Wishing you both every happiness. You deserve it." I appreciated the gesture, even if I didn't need her blessing to move forward. That's the thing about betrayal, it changes you, but it doesn't have to define you. For a long time, I thought Sarah's affair had ruined me for future relationships, had made me too cynical and suspicious to trust anyone again. But what it actually did was teach me to value honesty above compatibility, integrity above passion, and reliability above excitement. Emma and I have been married for 3 years now. We have our challenges all couples do, but we face them together, with open communication and mutual respect. We don't have the passionate intensity that Sarah and I had in our early years. But we have something deeper, a partnership built on choice rather than chemistry, on commitment rather than just attraction. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't seen Sarah with Marcus that day. Would she have eventually ended the affair and come back to our marriage? Would I have lived the rest of my life never knowing about her betrayal? Would we have grown old together, with me never suspecting that she'd once chosen someone else? Over me, I'm grateful I'll never know the answers to those questions. The truth, however painful, set me free to build something real with someone who chooses me every day, not because she has to, but because she wants to. Sarah taught me what love could feel like. Emma taught me what love should feel like. The difference, I've learned, is everything. Looking back now, I can see that my marriage to Sarah was built on an idealized version of love, the kind you see in movies, all passion and romance and grand gestures. It was beautiful while it lasted, but it wasn't sustainable. It was built on who we wanted each other to be rather than who we actually were. My marriage to Emma is built on reality, on seeing each other clearly, flaws and all, and choosing to stay anyway. It's less dramatic but more enduring, less exciting but more fulfilling. It's the kind of love that grows stronger over time rather than burning out in a blaze of intensity. I still think about Sarah sometimes, usually when I hear a song that was important to us or drive past a restaurant where we used to go, but the memories don't hurt anymore. They're just part of my history, part of the path that led me to where I am now. The scar tissue over my heart is tougher than the original skin, but it's also more flexible. I can love again, maybe even more deeply than before, because I know what it costs and what it's worth. I can trust again, not blindly, but deliberately. Not because I'm naive, but because I've learned to recognize what real trustworthiness looks like. If I could go back and prevent Sarah's affair, would I? It's a question I've asked myself many times, especially during the hardest days of our divorce. But I think the answer is no. Not because I'm glad she hurt me, but because that pain led me to Emma, to this life I'm living now, to this version of myself that's stronger and wiser and more capable of real love than the man I was before. Sarah's betrayal was the worst thing that ever happened to me. It was also, in a strange way, one of the best. It forced me to examine my life, to figure out what I actually wanted rather than what I thought I was supposed to want. It taught me that I could survive losing everything and come out the other side, not just intact, but improved. That's the story I wanted to tell you, not just about discovering infidelity, but about what comes after, about how you can be utterly destroyed and still find a way to rebuild, about how the worst betrayal can lead to the greatest growth, about how sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of a better one. The man who stood frozen on that sidewalk watching his wife kiss another man was someone I barely recognize now. He was smaller, more fearful, more dependent on other people's choices for his own happiness. The man I am today makes his own happiness, chooses his own path, and loves with intention rather than just impulse. Sarah gave me 10 years of her life, and for most of them, we were genuinely happy. But she also gave me something more valuable in the end. She gave me the chance to find out who I really was when everything else was stripped away, and who I am, it turns out, is someone worth loving. Not because I'm perfect, but because I'm real. Not because I'll never be hurt again, but because I've proven I can handle whatever comes. Not because I have all the answers, but because I'm brave enough to keep asking the questions. That's the most important thing. I learned from the worst day of my life. You are more resilient than you know, more worthy of love than you believe, and more capable of happiness than you imagine. Sometimes it takes losing everything to discover that the most important thing you need is something that can never be taken away: your own strength, your own worth, your own capacity to choose. How your story ends, and my story, it's still being written, one honest day at a time.